So good evening. My name is Brittany Drake Ford. We can go ahead and get started. I know some people got here pretty early. We saw some smiling faces at 6:30. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time and make sure that everyone can view and observe the presentation today. So my name is Brittany Drake Ford. I'm a member of the Zoning Rewrite, the Prince George's County Zoning Rewrite team. And on behalf of the Prince George's County Planning Department, everybody on the project team, please wave your hand. You are a part of the project team. You're on our zoning technical panel. So I would like to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to learn more about the proposed recommendations for updating the county's zoning ordinance. I want to first start off by acknowledging a few people. Mayor Eugene Grant of the city of Seat Pleasant is here with us this evening. Also, Mayor Pro Tem Jody Copa Eddy of the town of Berwyn Heights. And then also Councilmember Conrad Hurling of Greenbelt is also here with us this evening. Are there any other elected officials that I may have missed? All right. So modernizing the county's zoning ordinance has been, I'm so sorry.
I'm a former elected official, but I'll still say so.
Former delegate Jolene Ivy is with us as well. Thank you. So modernizing the county's zoning ordinance has been a nearly 2-decade process, with our most recent iteration starting nearly 4 years ago. And to date, we've held more than 300 community meetings on this project. So just as a refresher, the zoning ordinance is the law that determines how land can be used in a particular area. It addresses concepts like building height, uses, so commercial, residential, or industrial, walkability, and public notification. Zoning focuses on establishing the framework for what can be used where and how it can be built. So we are rewriting the zoning ordinance in Prince George's County primarily to improve the county's opportunities for investment and redevelopment. Our current zoning laws are very confusing and in some cases are implemented inconsistently. And this is really a large hurdle for the county to attract the type of development that we deserve as residents. And so we are requesting that interested parties provide feedback on our draft document, which is the comprehensive review draft that was released by the end of September, or was released, in the end of September, so that people provide comments on that by December 15th, 2017. Comments can be submitted by mail, email, or via our commenting application, Civi Comment. And if you are also interested in looking at a hard copy of the document, hard copies are available at every single branch of the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. So now I want to turn this over to Don Elliott and Craig Richardson of Clarion Associates, who are our prime consultants working on this project, to give you all a little bit of more information about the zoning rewrite and the comprehensive review draft.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank everybody for being here tonight. I'm going to do two things. We're going to do a short presentation to try to bring everybody up to speed on where we are in this process. I see a lot of familiar faces, which is great, but I also see new faces, and for planners, that's where you get excited, because you get new people in here too. So we do this over and over again to try to get as many people up to speed as possible. This is a fairly short presentation. I will go, first of all, into things we've already presented before, but to bring the new folks up to speed, and it's been 3 or 4 months, and just to remind you, then we're going to slow down and focus on what changed since the last time we presented this project. And I think that's the most important thing, the second most important thing. The most important thing is to get to the questions and answers. So you can ask us questions about, is this in there, is this out of there, can you do anything about that or the other issue that's important to me? One point I want to make is this. Those of you who've been involved over the past couple of years, these documents, the subdivision regulations and the zoning ordinance are now complete product. You won't turn into a page and say, oh, still under construction, we don't know what to do here, still talking about it. There are 2 places where we put something in here and we put a footnote in saying, this is still under discussion, it's a big issue, we're not sure this is going to stay in or not. There are only 2 of them in this document. But my point is, it's complete. If you were waiting to get a complete draft that had been reviewed and we tried to knit it all together, well, it's there now. Don't wait for the next one. It's there now. So let's go on with this presentation. I'm going to have to apologize that soon after I finish, I'm going to have to head to the airport. It's the latest flight I can get. But the whole rest of the team, including Craig Richardson and Tim Richards from Clarion, are here to answer. They've done a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and we're going to here to answer questions all night, although I will not be able. If I run out, it's not because I'm scared and I'm not sick. I just have to get to the airport. So, okay, let's do this. Working a minute ago. There we go. So I'm going to bring you up to speed, but I want to point out this bottom line. The background is at the top. The bottom is that the magic words here are comprehensive review draft. That's the draft that we are talking about right now. And it comes out of this process. Those of you who've been involved know that way back in the old days, 2014, we did a lot of roundup outreach, and then we did a recommendations report, which was a roadmap, and then we started drafting. And the yellow box are the steps we went through. We did it in 3 chunks, and then we ran a lot of hypothetical projects through it and say, does it make it easier to do good things? Does it make it harder to do bad things? What do we need to fix here? And then the blue text is where we are now. That means we have knitted together modules 1, 2, and 3, stuff that we have presented before, and tried to answer and include as many of the hundreds and hundreds of comments and requested changes that we got. So it's not just that we stapled them together. When you make a change to one part of this, it ripples through the rest of it, and you have to make the changes. But that's where we are right now. The council intends, and we are trying to stay on a schedule which would allow the county council to act on this in 2018, and it is our belief that they want to do that if they can do so thoughtfully. They've made it clear that they're not saying slow it down. They'd like us to be on schedule so they can do it, but they're not going to rush and make hasty decisions. That's the schedule we're at. Project is on schedule. We think we've stayed true to the roadmap, and we think we have reflected many of the key goals in Plan Prince George's 2035. And since there's another slide on that, I'm going to not get into the details here. The reason we did it, and again for the new faces in the room, was this. There are 2 reasons. A, you have a new plan, a new vision for the county that is much more sophisticated in terms of where do we want mixed use and density around the transit stations? Where do we want stable residential neighborhoods protected? Where do we want rural activities protected? It's new. It was only a few years old, and the old rules don't line up with the new vision. That's one reason. The second was, I think there was a broad consensus that in those areas where you want new development, around the transit corridors, transit centers in particular, you're not getting the quality of jobs, of retail, of office. The type and the quality of development does not match what other counties in the metro area around DC are getting. There was this feeling that it's not there. Furthermore, one of the reasons was the zoning and subdivision regulation. Very hard to get through, very hard to understand, amended repeatedly, internally contradictory, but perhaps most importantly, result in very unpredictable outcomes for both citizens and builders. Guys, if you want better investment, you take some of the risk out of it. We were told over and over by people, this is one of the most unpredictable places to try to get through the development process, and that was one of the keys we wanted to do. Here are the goals: to make it more streamlined and user-friendly, simpler zones, mirror the plan, implement the plan, which it does a lot. And then we've been told by the county council repeatedly, don't just tell us what's best in a generic sense. Figure out the best fit for Prince George's County. We are unique. We have a unique and very diverse population and development climate and environment, all the way from rural to very urban. Tell us what fits us and let us form our own opinion as to whether to take your advice. In Module 1, zones, I'm going to go quickly because this has been presented before. Dramatic reduction in the number of zone districts, and yet the 44 that remain are much better clued in to make the places in Plan Prince George's 2035. The number of micromanaged uses listed when you added them all up in the old laws has been reduced from 1,200 to 229. If you look at this is where I want to just mention, both at the urban and at the rural end of the scale, we think this is better aligned to protect the rural areas and to encourage development around the transit centers. We tried to make it easier to do the good things, harder to do the bad things. We think we have a better and more usable format. Here's the example. Each zone district, each of those 44 zone districts has a 2-page spread, and it looks like this. You have a purpose statement. You have a general picture of the development type. Is it tall? Is it spread out? Is it dense? Is it mixed use? Is it mostly houses? What is it? It's a conceptual picture to help you understand. They're typical pictures of types and scales of buildings that might be in that zone. there's a reference that says if you want to know what you can do in the zone, you got to go look at the use table. On the right-hand side is a list of dimensions. How tall? What are the setbacks? What's the open space requirement? Each one keyed to a little red dot. And below that, a little drawing, an axonometric drawing that says, this is where B is measured. This is where A is measured. This is where the height is measured. This is where the setbacks are measured. And down at the bottom, a reminder that this is a summary to help citizens in particular visualize. I hear they're rezoning the property on the corner from this to this, or there's an application. What would that mean? How does this picture differ from that picture in terms of scale? What are the differences? And a quick guide. But down at the bottom it says, you've got to read the rest of the code because there's parking, there's landscaping, there's a lot of other things to do. In development standards, so there's one chapter of the new code that says, what's the menu of these 44 zone districts? There's another one that puts a bunch of tables in that says, in every district, what can you do, what can you not do? Then there's a chapter that says, how good does it have to be? And it brings together all of this stuff about not can you do it, but how do you lay it out? Parking, circulation, lighting, mobility, landscaping. If the question you have is, how much landscaping? How good will it have to be? I'm not too worried about that use there, but I'm worried about how well it will fit in. There is a chapter called development standards where that is summarized. Review procedures. We have tried to clarify and simplify. There's a flow chart for every step in every procedure that the county goes through, and there are lists of criteria. I want to call your attention, call your attention to this bottom line. Although, as a governance person, a person who likes to see effective local governance, I like the words streamline, efficient. Many citizens, I think, are worried about that, because they're worried that that's going to come at the cost of their participation. So throughout the process, we've said, how do we make it more predictable, more efficient, and expand the opportunities for involvement? And so I'm going to go through several bullets that we put in here that we think actually improve the citizens' ability to get involved in these processes. This is very important. One of the things is, if it's a significant size or type of development, there's a requirement for a pre-meeting with the neighborhood before you can file the application. Why is that important? Will the developer be able to give you all the details? No, they haven't designed it yet. But by talking, I'll come back to the questions later, but I need to get through this. When you have that meeting, what it means is you have an opportunity to offer thoughts on where the building is, how tall it is, where would the access be. There's minimum amounts of information that has to be provided before the developer has spent money on their engineers and their architects and their drainage people. Once they spend that, and I'm not making these numbers up, 50 grand, 100 grand to figure out the engineering of their preferred layout of the site, and then you have a public hearing, people don't like it, they're understandably resistant to go back and pay that money again to change it around. So the proposal is you would have an early meeting to talk conceptually about it, nobody be surprised about it. You still get the public hearing at the end. But it's an additional early meeting so that there's an opportunity to talk through where does the access come from? How tall is the building? Is it at the back of the lot, the front of the lot? Talk to us about it so you can hear our opinions about it. And then you still have to do the engineering, but this is before the money is spent. That's a major thing. I'm sure it'll come up in questions and answers. Clarified how civic organizations get registered and how you make sure you get notice for everything. All of the notification requirements, is it mailed, is it posted, is it published, is it on a website, are all in one table, and in a variety of areas, they go beyond what Maryland law would require. One example is pre-application meetings, where you get notice of larger development. That's not required by Maryland law, but we think it is well suited to the issues in Prince George's County and the kind of conflict that happens in these things. Another one is that even if the decision is an administrative decision, that means there'll be no public hearing. It's a small deal. The only question in an administrative decision is, does it meet the code? If it meets the code, they get a permit. There are administrative decisions in every code. Small things are administrative, medium go to a public hearing, big go to the governing body. That's just how land use works. Even if it's a small thing that will not get a public hearing. I'll use an example. A sign or a bank. Bank's there and that says, I want to take down that sign, I want to put up a new sign. If it meets the code, they get a permit. There's nothing to, that's the only question. Is it too tall? Is it too big? Is it too close? Is it too light? Is it animated and it's not supposed to be? If it does, they get a permit. But what we've said is, a variety of administrative issues, you get a sign on the property anyway, so that people know it's coming. Even though there won't be a hearing. There's an opportunity to contact the staff and say, I think this proposal is not in line with the code. I don't want it for whatever reason. If your letter says it doesn't meet the code, then the staff can respond to it. If it does meet the code anyway, you're just angry about it, it's an administrative decision. They can't take it out of there. But it doesn't take away anything. It's an additional form of notice that says, you should know this is coming. I will tell you, this is something that I don't think is unique to Prince George's County, and it's not generic around the country. Most people would prefer to know in advance what's going to happen on that property rather than not know in advance. Even if they didn't have power to stop, you'd like to know earlier what's going to happen. So these are all parts of trying to strengthen citizen engagement. I'm going to go quickly through what are the changes. Since we came in July and we walked through some of these issues, 2 districts, the residential plan development low density there are 2 districts that have been taken out for the sake of simplicity. It turned out that was so similar to a residential plan development general district that they were combined. Campus Activity Center was a mixed-use type of activity center. Upon reflection, it didn't allow you to do anything you couldn't do through the other zone districts. And so, for the sake of simplicity, that was taken out. That's why we review it. There are some districts with the word legacy. There is a small list of districts that we had initially said can go away. Council asked us to put them back in because some people are nervous that they weren't sure they'd be as well or better off under the new zone than under these old zones, MXT, MUTC, and the design zone. And so, in this draft, there's a word legacy in front of those 3 names that are currently in the code. And they're put back in to say, even though we think that when people are converted to the new zone, they're actually better off than they were before, and it works better, they're unsure. And so council said, put them back in for the sake of discussion. We put them back in. We briefed council 2 days ago, and the reaction was, well, it's out there for discussion. Not sure we still agree. Some on council want to keep them. Some kind of said, I don't see the point of keeping these around forever. I want to be clear. A legacy district can only be used by somebody who has that district on their property on the day this code comes into effect. So we're not carrying them forward in addition to the new districts. It is to try to give people assurance if they already have that district and they're going down the road that they can complete it under those rules. Again, we still, in the 2 footnotes that I mentioned earlier, say staff doesn't think this is needed to be carried over, and Clarion doesn't think it needs to be carried over, but we were asked to put it back in for discussion. So, but the day after this code comes into effect, if you walk in and say, I've been reading your whole code, I kind of like this legacy MXT district. Could you give me one of those? The answer is, we can't even take an application on it. This is to protect people who were in that ahead of time until those developments are done. We actually believe that somewhere along the way, they'll wake up and say, you know what? I think I'm better under the new code. Instead of asking to keep it forever, I'm going to move into the new code. But those are changes from the last time. In addition, you can read there was a military installation overlay that was added by council along this process, and then there was a residential mobile home, just a mobile home park district, which was a planned district, and it now is a base district. Those are minor changes. Big change, though, and this top bullet is that in 3 of the activity centers, TAC, LTO, RTO, TO means transit-oriented, AC is activity center. These are places that are supposed to be mixed use around transit facilities to get residential and non-residential close to each other in order that people can walk and live closer to where they work, etc. Council has been worried for some time that even though we say you can do housing or you can do something else, it's all going housing. They have asked us to put in minimums. The new draft says there's an 18% minimum. For 5 years, you can build whatever you want. But after 5 years, we start looking. Within a quarter mile of your site, is there an 18%, at least 18% of the land area in commercial? If not, then you're going to start having to do commercial in addition to the residential. Or the opposite. In some scenario, if everybody's gone commercial, 5 years down the road, we're going to start looking and saying, from here on, at least 18% of this land has got to go into residential. I don't want to go into much depth now, except to say this is a very complicated process. It's hard to administer. We do this all over the country, and it's very hard to come up with a workable system to force mixed use. It sounds easy to say. I just said it. It's hard to do. Not just because of market forces, because of the job of measuring it. Who bears the burden of doing the thing that the market doesn't want to do right now? We told that to council. Council said, we hear you, but we're still very worried about the whole thing going residential. Keep working on it. Matter of fact, they said, we might want to apply this in more than just those 3 zones. So we have told them this is an imperfect solution. We are still trying to find good ways to do it. And instead of saying, well, if it's that hard, let's not do it, they said, still keep working on it. This is still important enough. We need to have you keep working, and we might even want to do it more. We have put in one table, a clear table, what things you can vary in a planned district in order to get some more flexibility and what you cannot vary. So that's what the table is. Use regulations, a couple of minor things. In the old table, every time you looked and said, in my zone, can I do this use, and you saw a blank cell, it meant you can't do the use. We were asked to put X's in those cells to make really clear that that means no. And so that's a minor typo, a minor formatting thing. In addition, we had used NA a few times, and we were asked to spell that out to make it very clear to people that means not applicable. Those are minor things. Council has been working on a lot of use things like urban farms, medical cannabis, pet grooming establishments, video lottery, and beekeeping. And so these have been in process, and they have changed in the latter rounds of this drafting effort because council's been doing it. Like medical cannabis, if they've adopted something, we carried it over. We're not changing their decision. We're putting it into the new format and carrying it forward. Anything they've decided, they don't need to re-debate it again. I want to mention before we go on, beekeeping. We've been spoken to Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and I see some shirts here tonight about, well, good, without shirts, but you still came for the bees. We've been told in very clear terms that the provisions we put in there are not appropriate for Prince George's County. They need to be reconsidered, and very clearly, they like the Montgomery County approach, which is not to regulate them at all, but to leave it up to state. I see the beekeeper folks are nodding throughout the audience here. So if that's what you came to say, we're happy to talk about it in Q&A, but we got the message, and we understand, and we have said publicly, and I'll say it again tonight, you're right, we're wrong. We put them together, we thought they were appropriate, they aren't appropriate. You've given us many illustrations of why wherever we got those standards do not apply to the bees and the bee industry in Prince George's County. So those will not be carried forward the way they are now.
Thank you.
Good. All right, I'm gonna go catch my plane. I think that's most of you right here. All right. Although, each night people have come and told us more about it, so we keep learning more about bees. I'm much smarter about bees than I was first. I'm going to finish this up in a couple. Yeah. I've been invited more than once to go visit the facility. I don't want to cut off the conversation. I just want to assure you we have heard that message, and I think staff agrees with that message. This happens, guys. It's very complicated. We do our best. Sometimes we get it wrong, and that time we got it wrong. But by coming out and talking to us, it didn't go into law. We need to revise it. So, development standards, I do want to point out this. Urban farming, food production, local food systems. We have added urban farm as a use, a small-scale agricultural activity. And in this draft, there are compatibility standards for people who develop around those facilities to try to help them survive. You guys know, when rural and agricultural activities are next to residential activities, you can have complaints. I think the philosophy of the plan and of the local food advocates is, when you move next to an agricultural operation, you should be the one to buffer the impacts from them. It's not their problem. You've moved next to them. That was already done for farms. In the new draft, it's also done for urban farms, the smaller scale activities that produce local food. Subdivisions, I'm changing. I think I see from your faces, zoning is what you can build and what you can do with your property. Subdivision is how you divide it into lots for development and what's the process you go. Those are separate bodies of law in Maryland and in every other state. You'd think the legislatures would put them all together, but they didn't. They're two different bodies of law. We were asked to revise subdivision as well. I'm not going to talk about grandfathering, except we have a couple slides that say we have tweaked the rules that deal with, okay, I'm already started down the path under the old law. Do I get to continue under the old law? And how far do I have to be under the old law? Or if I haven't started yet, do I have to go under the new law? That's when we say grandfather. How do we treat the transitions from the old system to the new? Those have been revised. every time I've done this around the country, I will say this is almost uniform across the country. People just want it to be fair. They want to come up with something so that if you've invested a lot of money in your property and process based on the old system, you can go ahead. And if you haven't, you don't. I mean, that's on a simple basis. We've tried to clarify how that happens. I make this point, I don't want to minimize this. It's very important. But it's not as important as getting the rules right. Because right now, transition, you have to get the transition of the new system fair and equitable and clear. 5 years from now, it'll be over, and you'll be running with the new code. And for 10 years from now, the point is, you're going to live with these rules for a long time. Getting the rules right is the bigger challenge. Getting the transition right is just a matter of refining it, and we're trying to figure out how to make it fair. And that happens a lot. The threshold between major and minor, I want to be clear that there are some divisions of land into small parcels for small development that are administrative. The planning director can approve them. They don't go to a hearing. The decision will be posted, and if you're unhappy with it, it can be appealed. Big ones go to the planning board for a hearing. Little ones do not. This is often true, and it's just a good governance principle. It's what I said earlier. Little things get done administratively for efficiency, and if they get it wrong, they get appealed. You get a notice, and you appeal the decision, you have a hearing. Medium things go to the planning board. That line between small and medium, things that are decided by staff and things that go to the planning board, has been revised, and I'd be happy to talk about the details of that when we get into Q&A. There are only 2 or 3 slides left. Adequate public facilities is part of subdivision, and it is the system by which the county determines is there adequate street capacity, recreational facility capacity, fire, police, EMS. When you want to divide property, do we have enough capacity to let you do that and serve you? Or are you making us short, and you're going to have to contribute to the solution? It's a very complicated process. It's complicated no matter. The system Prince George's County uses is not used all over the country. It's used in many states. It's complicated. No matter which tool you use, this is complicated. But in an earlier draft, we had said it's particularly weird for police, fire, and EMS. They have to be in particular locations. You can't build half of one. You have to build a whole one. This tool, Adequate Public Facilities Review, is a very difficult way to make sure you have adequate police, fire, and emergency medical in the right places at the right time. We recommend you take those standards out of the code and figure out a different way to do it. Council said, no, put them back in. You persuaded us, they're troublesome. We knew they were troublesome, but we don't want a code with holes in it. Put them in and we'll fix them later. So they're back in. I'm just letting you know that we said, come out, go back in. Today, when you go through that process, you get a piece of paper called a certificate of adequacy. And it doesn't have an end date. It goes forever, which is wrong. Nobody intended that to happen. It can't be that the evaluation, okay, there's enough traffic capacity for your project, you don't have to contribute, goes forever, even when more people move to Prince George's County. So the bottom line is we've said those last for 12 years. Not only do new ones issued under the new code last for 12 years, and then you can get one extension, you can see here, but everybody who's holding a piece of paper today that says, I was deemed adequate in the year 2014, it doesn't have an end date on it. After the new code's adopted, they will have the 12 years too. So not only the new ones, but the existing ones get that 12-year clock running. Why 12 years? We've had long discussions with the council and the planning board. Essentially, it allows for the possibility that you got the certificate and then the economy tanked and we go through an economic cycle and it comes back again. Depending on who you ask, that's 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, 11 years. But the point was, there's no magic to 12, except you don't want to make people redo it just because they spent the money to determine whether they needed more facilities and it was determined, it's okay. Whatever the determination was, yes, no, you need some of this, that would just evaporate just because the economy crashed. So the economy crashes, it's to give time to the economy to come back up, you to rearrange your financing, you to rearrange your tenants, and to not have to redo it just because for that reason. That's why. But remember, today, the number is eternity. So council said, definitely we need a number. Eternity is wrong. We had one council member say 5 or 10 years would make her happier than 12 years. But we've explained our rationale. Council, we have argued all along that council should not be able to call up things. Lost that argument. Council has asked for that to put back in. We have tailored it to Maryland law. There are things that can be called up, things that cannot be called up. And the standard of review is an appellate standard of review. Did somebody make a decision rather than fresh? Guys, we know this is a troubled process. We have said all along that Clarion's advice is to get rid of it. They were very polite to us. They listened to us. They gave us several chances to persuade them, and then they said, you haven't persuaded us. Put it back in. So it's back in. Departures, I'll talk about. There's a little ambit in the code for staff to have a little wiggle room, 5% of this standard, 10%. When you have odd-shaped parcels, weird buildings, odd circulation needs. And that is a good tool because it allows planners to go through without having a variance and the time and expense of a public hearing and an appeal on a foot here and a foot there. That line, how far should planners be able to exercise their judgment based on the site and the use to make this work, and how much is too much and leads to unpredictability? Those have been revised, and we can show you the list and walk through it if you'd like. I think that's all I need to cover about. That's the second, third, and the fifth bullet. Oh, third bullet. We had a provision that if you had a non-conforming use, it was legal and then the code changed and you shouldn't be there, that instead of the current law says you've got to bring in a legal use, we had said you should be able to make the case that you're bringing in another use that isn't normally allowed in that district, but it's better than the one you're replacing. It has fewer negative impacts. People really hate this use. Under the current law, it goes away, but until you can figure out how to put a legal use in that building, it can be vacant. We think the better practice would be to say, make the case that this is not normally a permitted use, but it's better than a vacant building, and it's better than the one we have now. We lost that one too. People are not comfortable and said, you gotta, it's okay with us. A lot of communities, communities go different ways on this. We understand the rationale. You should, if that's the use that's allowed in the district, you gotta bring in that use. The price you pay is that the building may remain vacant for a while, because you may not be able to find, that building may be functionally obsolete for those uses. And so that's the price you pay, but it's a judgment call, and it's not an unreasonable thing. It's just we recommended A, and we were told B. So I'm going to finish up. We think these are easier to navigate. We think they're better fit to the way development happens in Prince George's County. And we think they are going to make it easier to achieve the vision of the plan and to not have some of the stuff that's happening under the current code continue happening. The road forward is, this is the comprehensive review draft. As Brittany said, we'd love comments by December 15th. It's hard to know what your thoughts are on that without a map. Staff has been working on a map. We've gone from 73 labels to 44 labels. Staff has been working through formulas so that you try to even-handedly convert people from the old map to the new map. That is going to be available very quickly online so you can compare things back and forth. They haven't released it mostly because it's really hard work to figure out how to do it objectively and fairly. So I want to be clear, the goal is to convert over evenly. That keeps the debate on whether these documents are right. It doesn't turn into can I get my neighbor's property down zone? Can I get my property up zone? Can I get my enemy's property rezoned? No, so you can't have that. Once it becomes that, we lose focus on whether this is the right set of tools. Everybody's arguing about the map. So the goal at this point, obviously you can change the map in the future. The goal at this point is, can we convert it over so that the debate remains on, did we treat bees right? Did we treat gas stations, I think are going to come out, right? Gas stations right. Did we treat design standards right? Did we get transit-oriented development right? And the debate can be, is this book right, assuming it would apply to the same kinds of places as are under the current map, and then we'll open the door and people can talk about planning and refixing the map going down the road. I think that, I'm sorry. So that map is forthcoming very quickly. Council's going to do a retreat on this in January and spend a lot of time on it. Obviously, some of them have spent a lot of time. The comments we get till December, another round of comments, we got a huge stack and tried to do what we can, will be rolled into the legislative draft. And that is intended to be the one, at this point, that will begin being considered for formal adoption in 2018. Council is not committed to this other than I think they would like, we have made it so that they can do this under the current council's term of office rather than having to re-educate new council about it later on. They haven't committed, they're not going to sign a blank check. But they have asked us to do it so they have the opportunity, and we think we can. We think that we have comments till December, roll in the ones we can, put out a legislative draft. Remember, it's complete today. What's at stake is another round of review to see if people want to change it. It's not missing anything. It is that right or is that wrong, and do we need to redraft it? But they intend to have that as a legislative draft for consideration in the new year. So that's where we are with deep apologies. I've talked too much again, and I need to leave the airport. But I'm going to turn it over to Chad and let him correct everything I said that's wrong as soon as I leave the room. So thank you for your attention.
Yeah, appreciate it. So we're going to try to turn on this other mic, and Craig and I will try to address your questions. I will bring around the microphone since we are recording tonight for broadcast on our website. I'm sure everybody's going to want to look at that and maybe fall asleep to it a couple of times once we upload it. It'll be some good watching. Yeah, well, we have the website information. I have the business card I can read again tonight. So, yes. So we have a question slide, but we also have the project websites as well. And I just want to check sound levels okay?
Yeah, just keep it on your chin.
Right there?
Yeah, perfect.
Oh, that's completely different.
Yeah.
Okay.
And is this, yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let's start with some questions. And anybody can choose.
Question is the pre-application process. Will that be included? Will that pre-application be included with the application? So the people who are looking over this will be able to see how the community felt about what's going in. Second question, the industrial uses. Is there anything in what you're doing dealing with health impact assessments? Prince George's County, like in what's going on in Brandywine, Sheriff Road, has had a history of industrial racism, environmental racism. And we're in the Title VI with the state right now, dealing with it. What exactly, and the councilman and the planning board and the council have approved townhomes to be built around these places, cutting down trees. They call this economic development. They call it, Mel Franklin called it, we're redoing the road, we're going to improve the roads using townhome development. Are we addressing any of the Title VI issues in this new process?
If you take the second question, I'll deal with the pre-application question, and then you do the health impact. Okay, so with the pre-application, the way it's written is that after the pre-application neighborhood meeting is held, the applicant needs to document the results of that meeting. So everything that the citizens said, what the applicant has done to respond to the citizens' concerns, how they've influenced the design, all that is part of the document that will need to be submitted as part of the application package.
So, and let me just elaborate a little bit, because Don mentioned this, and I think it's important to understand. The pre-application neighborhood meeting is a new procedure. It's new, and it's going to apply. It's going to be required for the larger type of development applications. And there's notification requirements. The meeting is going to have to be held, and the purpose of this is to put the neighbors and adjacent property owners on notice, and anyone who registers. There's a provision for registration. Real quick, one more thing is one of the huge problems with the process now that makes it overwhelmingly racist is and just inadequate period, is the fact that for example, the power plants were approved or industrial uses have been approved around there, and they only have to send notice out to abutting properties. Everyone's affected in that area. You're talking up to maybe a 3-mile radius. And I noticed I didn't see the individuals being notified. I just saw civic associations, groups like that, but that's still grossly inadequate. It should go to the community. And if the applicant or the county has to do something called meaningful engagement. And literally, looking at Title VI and some of the things that go on, it literally means that sometimes you guys get some people and go out and knock doors to find out exactly what's going on. It's not just we just send a notice out and whatever happens, happens. It's a little more in depth. And I recommend you get Department of Transportation involved, Maryland Department of Transportation involved,
Because again, that area, you're talking 3,000 trucks a day going through that community. I don't know, it's a mess. And then one more thing is you're 12, you're 12 years on the being able to do something with transportation. That's inadequate, and I'm going to close a huge set of comments, so I'll conclude.
All right, thank you, and thank you for that insight. And we'll take a look into what you've raised tonight. I do think that we should speak to the
Health impact,
Yep.
yeah. In terms of the health impact, the philosophy, sort of our approach to this is, and we have reviewed a lot of codes, and I've seen a lot of codes that had health impact statement requirements. The problem with those types of regulations is there is a procedure, but there's no requirement.
You need to amplify your mic.
You guys?
Just right on your chin, right on your chin.
Okay. Is that better?
Yep.
The problem with that type of tool is there's a process and there's this lengthy analysis, but there's no requirements. In other words, if an analysis shows there is a potential problem, there's no rules in the regulations to address the problem. So here's what we suggested, and we've talked about this early on in the process, and we have attempted to do, is we have attempted, in terms of dealing with health impact issues, to include those rules, those standards. We have included, for example, many requirements for for walkable urbanism. In other words, to get people to walk, requirements for sidewalks. There are requirements for connections and pedestrian connections as well as road connections to ensure higher degrees of walkability. We've strengthened the rural protection regulations. We've attempted to strengthen, you've got tree protection regulations. We haven't made a lot of changes to those. So that's how we have dealt with this health impact issue in the regulations today.
A little off base what I'm saying. What I'm talking about is factory homes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going on right now. How do we stop factory homes? So in your pre-application process, and again, have it linked to the application process, make it mandatory, but also put in there mitigation. Community knows what community needs. Also community benefits. Has there been discussion and creation of a community benefits agreement? Make sure that's part of this. This is a big deal. We have to live with this once these decisions are made. And for the past 50 years, no matter what color the administration is, we get messed on. So here you go.
When you use it, I'm just curious, when you use the term factory home, what?
You build a factory.
Oh, a factory, contiguous.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things, and this is new, and again, we encourage you to take a look at these regulations. I think it's very important because clearly the devil's in the details. But one thing we've added is a set of neighborhood compatibility standards. And now there is a rule in the regulations that say if any type, it's not just a factory, but any type of non-residential commercial development, higher density multifamily development is proposed to be located adjacent to existing single family or two family development or other types of residential development, there's a list of about 14 requirements. They don't have a choice, they have to comply with it. Dealing with things like buffering, setbacks, how you deal with height. There's a whole list. I'm not going to list them all. And with respect to this issue of industry in relationship to single-family homes, you can deal with that issue in a couple of ways. One is, I think, in the rezoning process, that the rezoning, in other words, the mapping process, that certainly we'll be looking very closely in ensuring that that there's some transition between industry versus residential areas. That'll also be there too.
As a result of the normal master plan process, absolutely. But one thing is important to understand is with the neighborhood compatibility standards that Craig mentioned, we think there are going to be strong protections, but they will only apply to private development. the issue that, the challenge that I think you're facing is with the power plants and some of the other things. Those are regulated by the state public
We're
utilities.
handling that.
Okay.
We're handling that. Believe me.
All right, well, it's nothing that our zoning ordinance can regulate.
Good stuff's coming.
Okay.
So,
All right, Dr. Edwards?
I certainly want to respond, being a Title VII and Title VI working for EEOC, and I'm familiar with that. But there's a couple of things that concern me. I also served on the board under the Clinton administration on the inequalities for poor neighborhoods where all of this pollution and stuff starts, which is what he was addressing back here a few minutes ago. But it's sort of cute the way the words are played in this. We notify the community. What is the point in notifying the community when it has no leverage to change or stop anything? It's just like I'm telling you what I'm going to put next door to you tomorrow morning, and you can't do a thing about it. So what is the point in notifying the community? It's a false sense of hope, or that we might be able to do something about this project when you know it cannot be. It is permitted use, and it's going to be used for the purpose. You don't even take into consideration that there's already 10 in that same community, and you're going to bring another 4 or 5 in the same community because it's permitted use. So the question that was asked back here, environmental racism, is the reason why I left the commission at the state level after the Clinton administration put in an executive order to deal with that because of what you just said. It's there on the books, but there's no enforcement. We went to Johns Hopkins University, and they did a study and published that study that environmental racism is taking place in the most, I would say, communities with the less influence. Same thing with the I-1 zoning that he's talking about, I-1 and I-2. All of that is inside the Beltway. And so therefore, anytime that anybody wants to put a factory right next door to your home in an I-1 zoning, it is permitted. And so, it's really a waste of time for the people, including myself, to go down to the planning board and complain about something that is already permitted. Thank you.
If I can respond in a couple of respects. Number one, I did mention these neighborhood compatibility standards, and I do think they will make a difference. Maybe not as much of a difference as you hoped when you've got industry against residential, but there are going to be, if these rules are adopted, there are going to be some changes. I mean, there are going to be some distances that are going to have to be, these buildings are going to have to be set back. They're going to have to be buffers. They're going to have to be a lot of other things. The second thing, and you mentioned about why does notification matter? Because we can't affect anything. Many of the types of development applications where we are providing early notice, you can make a difference. Now, in an instance with the site plan, where it's administrative in many instances, and if you comply with the rules, I agree with you that there are rules that are going to apply. But with any type of rezoning, a special exception, variances, there are many instances when you can make a big difference. The public can make a big difference.
That's why I'm talking about administrative, because they cannot make a difference in the administrative. If you're talking about zoning and rezoning, of course we can go down. If you're talking about zoning and rezoning, of course you can make a difference in that, but administrative things that have already been determined that can be put in that community, it doesn't matter. We have a proliferation now of dollar stores,
Yes,
hair salons,
that's it.
false wig shops. I call them fat shops, those fitness centers, they're on every corner. And all we have to do is follow the, eat right, and we won't have to worry about it. But all of that kind of crap. Now, who is going to put in a very upscale restaurant or anything in a community where they know that those dollar stores and those hair salons attract a certain level of individual? It's not going to happen. So those are administrative functions that are permitted in our communities. It is disgusting.
Well, let me just say a couple of other things with respect to that, and that is, we have attempted, and I would encourage you to look at these standards, because with respect to these site plans, where you've got a use that is permitted, and there are going to be rules you're going to have to follow, one of the things we have attempted to do with these regulations, and I can assure you this, there are a lot more specific, measurable requirements in this draft, is we have attempted to include very clear standards. There are new design and form standards to improve the quality of any development that comes in, as well as a number of other specific standards.
We just want to meet some more questions, and we'll come over here next.
Hi, thank you both for coming to present this. I had one question that was kind of just on clarification. You mentioned like legacy, then also grandfathered into I guess, if you're in the middle of the project, but then you also mentioned that if you were in an area and the use of that business was not permitted, then you'd have to vacate, even if the building would be vacant. So I'm not really understanding, because to me, you talk about legacy and grandfathered in, it seems like the same thing, but maybe he's referencing something different when he was giving his presentation. And then my other question is more about the process. You talked about, well, they'll notify, there'll be some type of format or regulation or process of how they're supposed to notify the community, and they'll have to submit that with their application. But is there also going to be some type of weight given to, do they actually implement those suggestions that were given by the committee? So if you have this meeting that you're forced to have, and you get suggestions and feedback, and then you supply that feedback with your application, what is making sure that they're taking the feedback? Is it weighted that they had to do X% of the feedback by the committee? Is the council supposed to take that into consideration when voting? Or is it just a meeting to say they had a meeting?
It's more than a meeting to say they had a meeting, but at the same time, it's also that the council can't take that into consideration. They can't weight it. That would be considered sort of like planning by plebiscite or planning by the community, which is not allowed in the state of Maryland, or pretty much any place in the United States. But what it would do is provide an opportunity, what it's intended to do is provide an opportunity before the applicant spent a lot of money on their engineering and architecture, before they've gone through so far into the process that they're not willing to make any changes, where there's an opportunity to show some sketch drawings and work with the community at a phase where they're much more willing to make changes and influence the project. So it's intended to result in more collaborative outcomes and result in more of an overt say, to complement, not replace, but complement the current public hearing process, which is very backloaded in Prince George's County. You come out to a public hearing, everything's already been decided more or less. There's some wiggle room, but the design is so far along, it's very difficult to change. So that's what that meeting is intended to help provide an early input opportunity. With regard to the legacy zone and grandfathering, I think what you're speaking to deals more with what's called non-conforming uses. So when change is made to the code and there's an existing business in a zone, or it might be a commercial zone, a commercial business that became a residential zone. A situation where through no fault of the owner and the operator, the business owner, they've been made an illegal use as a non-conformity. So they're allowed to continue as long as they were legal at some point. When they got their permits, they could continue as a non-conforming use. But there are certain standard rules in Prince George's County. If you vacate for more than 180 days, you can't restore that use. If you want to do an addition to your nonconformity, you have to get a special exception or special permission to do that addition. So what Clarion had initially recommended is that when you're dealing with nonconformity, you might have, as Don mentioned, an obsolete building that can't really accommodate the type of uses that are permitted anymore. So they had some provisions that you could substitute in another use so that the building doesn't become vacant and it reduces light. There's a policy decision that's been made that, well, we'd rather see those uses go away and more appropriate uses come in, so that piece has been removed. So as long as you're legal at some point, you can continue. But if you leave that use for too long, then you won't be able to proceed with that use anymore. So hopefully that gets it what you're trying to do.
Any questions?
I'll let you go first.
Good evening. My name is Wayne Ayu. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the City of Sea Pleasant, a smart city of excellence. And my question is very focused. So there are 27 municipalities in Prince George's County. Only one of them has zoning authority, and that's the City of Laurel. And so when I go after investors and developers to bring them into the City of Sea Pleasant, smart city of excellence, what happens is the first question they ask us is, what is your plan? Where is your master plan? We have our own strategic plan, but that does not equate to what they consider to be a master plan. So my question is, in those 27 municipalities, have you received either a master plan or some form of a strategic plan from those municipalities to guide what you're doing here? Because when you mention nonconformity, in our situation, we believe, like the doctor said, that Dollar Trees, dollar stores, liquor stores, hair salons, and all these things that are typically in the black community, in the quote-unquote distressed community, are nonconformities to what we want to do. However, the development of a master plan for a small area of 5,000 people, 1 square mile, 17% poverty level, 60% unemployment, is not out there. So have you received those types of plans from the 27 municipalities in Sea Pleasant, in Prince George's County? And if you have not, how have you made up for that in terms of your draft?
What you're speaking to speaks to broader issues at the state level, and it's talking about the delegation of authority in Prince George's County. Laurel, because all places are unique, but Laurel is unique in a different way. It's straddling 3 jurisdictions. So if we see planning and zoning authority, because of some of the challenges of interjurisdictional coordination, none of the other 26 municipalities in Prince George's County have planning and zoning authority. That's a state issue. There's nothing that we can do about it in this effort.
Well, I mean, I just stated as a fact. My question is about the master plans from the other 26, and how is that incorporated in what you're showing us today?
As a partial result of that state delegation of authority, the planning authority for Prince George's County lies with the planning department and the county itself. So we're working from the general plan of Prince George's County, Plan 2035, but we also have about 37 existing small area plans, master plans, transit district development plans, sector plans for every place in Prince George's County except the city of Laurel. And we use that plan guidance to inform Plan 2035, which is directly informing the zoning ordinance update. So Sea Pleasant, I believe the most recent plan is probably the Subregion 4 master plan, which was done in 2010. So that guidance was incorporated into Plan 2035, and that is then incorporated into the zoning rewrite.
So the answer is you have not specifically received any of those type of plans from the municipalities, but you're working on those general plans that you received for Prince George's County.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Ashley Sharp. I'm a Community Engagement Officer for Congressman Anthony Brown. My question is, I just attended a meeting in the Tri-Area Civic Association area, and their concern is that there's a particular 7-Eleven coming, and they were able to find the loophole that was mentioned about having a special review of the site plan because they're considered a small property. However, they're not a gas station because they have a convenience store connected to it. So in my time growing up here, born and raised, there is a number of gas stations that to me tend to bring down the appeal and, I guess, social enjoyment of the area. So is there a way, if we can't prevent these people that are using both definitions from doing the special appeals process, is there a way to include gas stations in the part that you guys had mentioned you were going to take out, which was the resource, something about the resources with the EMS, the police, all those things that are required within certain areas? Is there a way to have gas stations also, so that they would be considered to have fewer in certain areas and they'd be distributed more properly? And secondly, if not, can we, or could we also consider having grocery stores within those stipulations to make sure that those food deserts are covered as a resource for that community?
In terms of the gas station issue, and I don't have the code, in front of me right now, but gas stations are clearly allowed in some of the commercial districts. There are some standards, some use-specific standards that deal with sort of quality development issues that apply to those gas stations. Those are the standards that are in there right now. I will tell you that some communities, for example, who have concern. Well, I would suggest, number one, you take a look at the code and see what districts they're in, and see if you're comfortable with that. If you aren't, we would like to hear from you. Secondly, I will say, and this is not in the code right now, but there are some communities where we have worked that do want to place some additional limitations on gas station locations. And, they might place, this is rare, that doesn't happen very often, but they will place, some limitations on the number of gas stations, for example, that can be located at certain intersections in the community. Or that, they might look at some distance requirements, even though that's really, you'd have to be very careful in implementing that. So there are, some potential options with respect to that issue. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second question.
I'll touch on that one, but just to sort of put another perspective on the gas station discussion, through the refinements to the definition of the uses, and we don't define most of our uses today, and through the use-specific standards that Craig mentioned, we have addressed an issue where a gas station could be subject to either special exception or detailed site plan. The convenience store aspect is part of the actual definition of a gas station in the new code, so all gas stations will be treated similarly. There won't be that kind of loophole. In terms of, you mentioned APF, I'll just touch on that very quickly. Gas stations would not be an adequacy thing. They wouldn't be treated the same way as fire EMS, but Craig did talk about some jurisdictions and limitations, and also that very important caution of it can be very tricky to do that and have it stand up. The last point you raised was regarding grocery stores and whether you can create a zone that encourages that. Yes, but it wouldn't be very effective. A grocery store is going to locate to a community nowadays with at least 15, if not 20,000 residences within a certain radius of the site it's going to go to. And if you just don't have that critical mass of population and of the other things that they may look for, median income, for example, you could zone it for a grocery store, but grocery stores are still going to locate there.
He mentioned that there would be a map coming out with the potential new zones soon. Can you give us some idea what's meant by soon? Are we talking hours, days, weeks?
Seconds. Weeks into short amount of months.
Okay. So before we have to get our comments in?
I don't know. We will have we have already a pretty robust idea staff draft version. Whether it's finalized once we've taken a complete and detailed look at it and fixed any nuances and it's ready for public release, that I can't answer right now. But we're working on it to try to get that out as soon as possible.
Question about input. Questions that have been raised before, and I really applaud the question about that. If a proposal for development is before a community, how far out from that prospective development does that outreach extend? And the other part of that question, in terms of the proposal of actually getting more involved with the community by actually knocking on doors. I have another idea that might be simpler and actually might bring about more meaningful input on both sides of the issue. And that's to actually conduct at least an informal charrette so that the members of the community that are in that adjacent area of the development can actually be sitting down at the table and then see what's being proposed, and maybe at the same time, what's really important, and I think maybe that's the major issue that's being brought up, is that there would be an opportunity in a more meaningful fashion for members of the community to say, well, okay, we can go with that, but what if we added this or that kind of thing? That would, I think, it would incentivize people in that community to get involved.
Mitigation. So the first question was the timing?
The distance.
Oh, the distance requirements?
Yeah.
Well, there are two notification requirements. One is a posting. In other words, there's going to be there's going to be there's a requirement that signs be posted on the particular property about the meeting. Secondly, and it's a certain distance, like 200 feet or 300 feet.
It's but adjacent properties, which is going to be pulling out that distance, any abutting property, any municipality within 1 mile, and then any party of record, and the COM CB12 list, Registered Civic Associations. So today, and what will be carried forward in the proposal, is that any civic organization can register for up to 2 council managed districts to receive information. So that's kind of on the broad end there.
And on the charrette issue that you raised, I mean, I think in many instances it could be a very good idea. Problem is just the resources that would have to be committed to that. And for example, if a developer applicant was interested in engaging in a charrette, they could certainly do that. We certainly wouldn't. It certainly is not prevented, and in some instances it clearly would be encouraged. Yeah. And that could be done. It doesn't need to necessarily be done in the ordinance. We're preparing an application manual. That's the kind of thing that can go in.
Because I do think that
Craig, if you can
that
do the mic.
process were to be, okay. I don't have to use my theater voice. If that process could be part of, at least very heavily encouraged, not required, I think the thing is that the developer, here's the benefit that could result, is that the developer could learn a lot more about what it is that the community is interested in, and further, it's the community that you would hope would be part of actually supporting the business that you're developing.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Sharon Lindbergh. I'm the Director of Public Engagement for the City of Sea Pleasant, a Smart City of Excellence. And I wanted to state that we have 21% seniors within the City of Sea Pleasant. They are our most active residents within the community. I just kind of wanted to know, because some seniors don't come out to night meetings, they like to be a part of the zoning process. Are there any type of mechanisms in place to include the seniors' inputs for the zoning process at all?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. We've been trying to reach out to as many people as we can through, we've done the mass mailing of the brochure we have here this year as we got it a little bit closer to this comprehensive draft. We use the internet pretty extensively. I don't know how well connected your senior community is to the net, but we do that. We've reached out to municipalities and hope that we have some opportunities that can be identified for further collaboration. We've also taken a stance from the very beginning that we will meet with anybody, anywhere. So if you have your communities get in touch with us, with Brittany or myself, we can set up a meeting and come out there in the daytime as well. We'd be more than happy to do so. Thank you.
Good evening. I have 2 questions. I'm Belinda Queen. First question is concerning my youth. A lot of the zoning and the planning to me is outdated and being planned by a lot of seasoned people, and I don't want to say old but of age, but I'm going to say seasoned to be nice. But it's not what my kids and my grandkids want. And I think until we learn to go into the school system and listen to the next generation, because by the time you get a lot of that stuff done, a lot of us will not be using it. I think when we're doing the zoning and a lot of the rewrite, we really need to be knowing a little bit more of what the next generation, how they want their houses, how they want to use, where they want to shop at. So that's my first thing. What are we doing? Are we going into schools? Are we talking to some of the high schools? Are we looking at what they see for future, what they want to buy? You know, what businesses they want to shop at? First question. My second question is, now that I am getting older, and a lot of people I know, I want to downsize, okay? My kids are growing, you know, old. But all the houses are 2, 3-story houses, $300,000 to $500,000 that you're letting builders build. I don't want that. I want everything on one floor. I would like to have a new house, but we're not making houses like that. But that's one, and I don't want to live in a senior citizen area because I'm not there yet. But I deserve to live in a house like my grandmother did in a neighborhood where it's a regular house and everything is on one floor. Why are we not putting that in the zoning?
Here, here.
Well, let me say that with respect to your second issue, we in the zoning ordinance, or the zoning ordinance is not going to be able to make the private sector develop those type of housing. But what the zoning ordinance can do is it can provide opportunities. In other words, it can remove any kind of obstacles for those type of opportunities. And by the way, I certainly empathize with you. That's the kind of house that I want. So, and that's one thing we've been careful in terms of doing it, to ensure that those types of housing opportunities, that variety of housing opportunities, is available. You know, not only a single family, two-family, the townhouse, the multifamily. So we've attempted to be fairly aggressive on that issue.
And so I believe the other question was, or your first question was about how are we really getting younger people involved in the process and how are we getting them engaged. So we have been developing partnerships with the Prince George's County Public Library System, where we go out and we do workshops with the youth at Bowie Library. We've also met with the Fort Township Youth Council, where we conducted about a 2-hour workshop on planning and zoning and what does it mean, which was pretty much like a short charrette, where we talked to them about the zoning rewrite and really tried to get some of their feedback. We've also been at some middle schools and elementary schools as well. And on November 4th, shameless plug for PG Parks, we will be at the STEAM Fest at the Showplace Arena, providing some additional updates for children there, getting them a little more active. So we really do try to go to like the National Night Out activities where we know families will be, because we do believe that building a community, the community that we're building, we are building for people who are younger than us. And so we want to make sure that we're engaged with them and that they also can provide feedback and input on what they want to see.
So I have one in the middle, one in the back on this side, and then one up in the front over here.
Hi. I just want to know, what are your plans for our cement plants that are in our area? We have one that's on Sheriff Road, and now that's north of the Inner Beltway, and now there's one on Forestville and Pennsylvania Avenue. So if that's a health issue, we're breathing those fumes, and they're building more houses, but we're still having more cement plants.
Well, one thing we've done is we have added use-specific standards for concrete batch plants. In fact, there was a comment, it was either the meeting last night or the meeting in the night before, that maybe the standards that we have included are a little bit too stiff, too aggressive. But we felt like it was important, you know, to place some limitations on, if you're going to build one, you know, there's certain things that need to be addressed. So I would suggest you take a look at that. You know, we have attempted to address that issue.
But due to the health issue, why would they be built in an established communities where you have families?
You know, in terms of where they would be allowed under the zoning ordinance, in the zone they would be allowed, the mapping is done, certainly that will be looked at. And I agree with you. I mean, it shouldn't be done, it shouldn't be allowed in a established neighborhood.
Just a quick thing. The state is wondering why, because Prince George's County has to take those health impact assessments seriously. They are wondering why they're not being utilized at the local level.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
The health impact assessment's not used at the local level, so speak to the
Because
challenges of
the
implementing.
state doesn't handle that, you guys do. It's all the counties, all the localities handle health impact assessments, community impact assessments, things like that, that are to help alleviate some of these problems. So again, mitigation with the community, things like that. These are things that planning is supposed to be a part of.
Well, as I said earlier, when I talked about the issue, what we have attempted to do is include rules, standards in the regulations to deal with the potential health issues that we, that we identified, the community has identified so far. I would suggest that you take a look at the regulations. If you feel like that there are some issues that we've missed, then please let us know.
But your regulations are only going to cover new things that are built, right? They're not going to cover these existing.
It would cover new and potentially, if something is redeveloped, is redeveloped, it could potentially apply. Yeah, it's going to provide prospectively into the future. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Interestingly, concrete batching plant was one of the things I wanted to bring up also. In Bladensburg, there is a place there already that is an industrial area, and they're already doing some things that are polluting, and they want to add a concrete batching plant to their current property. And so they're going through this special exception process, but it seems to me, having gone before the zoning hearing examiner and to see this process, I'll be shocked if she doesn't approve it. And I really think that we need to have a tool, an environmental justice tool, that takes into account, that puts weight on what is already in an area to see if an area can stand to have that additional stress, that additional pollution. And if you can consider other things too, like 7-Elevens or gas stations or whatever, how many do you really need in an area? So that is part of the zoning process, not just to say, well, it's zoned commercial, and this is a commercial use, so we can have, you can have another one of those. No, there should be some kind of weight given to it so that you say, nope, that would tip the scale, and we won't allow that.
We'll take a look at the concrete. As I said, we have added standards. They're not in your regulations right now on these concrete plants, but we'll take I don't know if it addressed that issue you talked about, sort of cumulative impacts, but we will take a look.
Well, there is a University of Maryland professor who has created an environmental justice tool, and he demonstrated it a few weeks ago. And it's something to consider. I don't understand why we don't include something like that. And I did actually have one other question. Early in the program tonight, they said that they added back in the council call-up procedure. But it was also said that we wanted to give some certainty to the development process, because I've heard from many people it's so difficult to get through the process in Prince George's that developers don't want to invest here. And sometimes we can be shooting ourselves in the foot by creating too many barriers. So on the one hand, I want good development, but I also want to make sure that the developers feel comfortable coming here. And I don't understand what was the rationale? If you could explain for adding that back in.
We framed the issue early in this process, and you're right. We have been very consistent. Clarion has been very consistent on this issue throughout, and that is okay, you've heard us. Your council is a legislative body, and we take our directions from them. And
What was their explanation?
Well, I mean, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think that some of the reasons expressed was that they felt like that, if there was a particular issue, they're the elected officials, and if there are citizens that think there is an issue that potentially that they should take a look at, then they'll have the right to take a look at it. And believe me, we have discussed this issue with members of the public at a number of these meetings, and there are people on both sides of the issue. So
One more thing I would add.
We were directed to do that.
One more thing I would add is that there was a recent, last 2 years or so, change to state law regarding who could have standing to appeal a case. And that decision restricted the appellate bodies, the parties, citizens, to those folks who had standing, which had a certain legal meaning. And that played very heavily in the council's decision-making on restoring call-up. Because the number of people who could appeal cases was so limited by the state, they felt they needed to have call-up restored to preserve the community's concerns.
Okay.
Are there any standards for who tests the quality of the air? See, we don't want the same person that's doing the polluting tested and giving us feedback to the quality of air. And you talk about whether or not they're built right next door to housing development or whatever. We don't know how the distance that pollution travels. And unless there's some kind of quality control, there's been too much asthma, heart trouble, cancer, and all kinds of things in the developed areas of the county. And we found that at the state level when I was on the committee.
Right, and I'm just going to ask, because we're recording, we just need to make sure we have an orderly progression of questions so we can jump in. But I'll touch on that. Dr. Edwards asked about air quality and pollution, making sure that people who generate pollutants aren't measuring air quality. Well, air quality is actually the example I use when I talk about the challenges of health impact assessments. The air quality of the DC region is pretty poor, but it's a super regional issue. And no single developer can possibly be expected to mitigate the impacts of the regional air quality. So that's one of the major disconnects of a health impact assessment's findings with what can be reasonably expected from a developer to mitigate.
I'm a resident of Greenbelt, a planned city built starting in 1937, and I'm concerned about preserving the historic quality of our city. And if anybody present has better information than I will cheerfully turn over this microphone. I have some language here that I don't necessarily fully grasp. It's from a petition that Eileen Kroll submitted to our city council. And I'd like to just read it out for the record, if I may. The petition states that there would be no increased density, height, and mass allowed in Old Greenbelt under the new zoning ordinance that we would ask for this. The protections must be in place concurrent with the adoption of the new zoning ordinance. These protections must cover the Greenbelt Historic District, including Roosevelt Center, the Community Center, GHI, Greenbelt Forest Preserve, and all areas currently covered by the RPC zone, and the Greenbelt specific NCOZ be immediately released, and that Greenbelters have an opportunity to provide meaningful and timely input.
You asked if anybody had more up-to-date information to jump in, so here I am. This afternoon, the Greenbelt NCOC draft that Clarion produced was shared with Mayor Jordan and GHI. And Councilmember Turner responded to the letters from the City of Greenbelt and GHI on this issue. And I have a meeting scheduled with the GHI leadership and Terry Ruby next week. The summary of the issue is the tool for the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay Zone should be created in this process to give people an opportunity to protect neighborhoods. It's applicable in many places across the county, not just in the City of Greenbelt. A specific NCOC for the City of Greenbelt will not proceed at the same time as the zoning ordinance. It's going to have to come after. But the work on that NCOC can proceed at the same time between the City Council and the residents of the community. Question here and go there and there.
Hello again, Crystal Orieva. I had a question again, kind of going back to the presentation. It was mentioned that there would be a review process after 5 years, and I think it was pertaining to mixed use to make sure, for example, if there were too many residential units being built, then you'd move to commercial and the varied by, I think, 18%. So I'm just curious about what that process would look like. So what, you stop issuing permits until you reach the 18%? Or do you say that we're only going to do a percentage variance for a certain amount of time? And then how long would that look like? And then is it possible in that language to put some of those regulations that were mentioned earlier about the amount of dollar stores and hair salons? Is there any way to be more specific on the commercial uses as well when it comes to percentage?
Well, there are uses that are identified, there are commercial uses that are identified in the zoning district that, in that area. And that there are the use categories that we take a look at it. Don valued in his presentation on this issue of ensuring that there is mixed use in these transit areas. One of the things he mentioned was the difficulty of actually implementing that concept. Primarily because one of the things we have learned over the last decade or so is that because a number of governments across the country have attempted to implement a requirement that 30% or 35% of development be mixed use. In other words, at minimum 30 or 35% be non-residential. And it hasn't worked very well. In other words, it's just not happening. Developers, there are limitations on that. And I think initially it was attempted on a site-by-site basis. That doesn't work. What we have attempted, or what we have at least drafted in this regulation is a requirement that applies over a larger area, not just on one site, and over a period of time. In terms of the process itself, exactly how this is going to be implemented, we're still working on it. That's the issue. We have explained to the council the challenges in terms of actually implementing this in a way that's going to be really workable. And they feel very strongly about it. They told us, keep working on it. This is a work in progress, but we flagged it for you because it is an issue that is important to the council.
Are there examples of people who look at other communities that are doing this?
No.
No.
That's one of the issues. There aren't places where we can look where it's worked so far. So we're working through it.
Hi, I live in an unincorporated area around Seabrook. I am one of the beekeepers, so we're delighted to hear about news on that. Some of the other regulations in here felt more like they were HOA, and I actively tried to move into an area there wasn't an HOA. The issue on the antennas. Why is the issue about antennas something that is raised in the zoning? I think it's much too minor a thing, and it doesn't address the more important issues. Thank you very much for all of those that have raised the issues about environmental justice in the industrial areas. I'm concerned about the relationship between the commercial and the industrial areas. The commercial area by me near the Seabrook Mart Station was zoned commercial. It started out as a barber shop and an office. The builder that built my home, one-person shop, turned it into a construction company. That construction, the company sold it. The current construction company is huge. It has many county contracts. We are beset with dump trucks, flatbed trucks, all manner of traffic and noise. And so my concern is the relationship between use and impact. If it's acting as if it was an industry, maybe it should be treated as an industry. That's in terms of the material storage, the pollution we're getting, the type of vehicles they use, the volume of vehicles, the noise that they have, and the safety implications. So I'm very concerned about use does not necessarily equate to impact, and there are issues around the not only the construction but also the vehicles. We have repo lots, we have repair shops there. These are really much closer to industrial, but they're zoned historically commercial, and they've morphed in a way that the zoning does not address.
The current zone.
The current, yes, and in fact, they're trying to zone the current residential lots that are left as commercial so that they can expand the construction areas. And I don't think that this is good, and I don't think that the zoning accommodates that.
It's the Seabrook Park Station. It should be transit oriented. It shouldn't be a place for dump trucks. And the other concern that I don't see brought up here, but it was mentioned in passing, was the role of technology. Our community has vastly changed, not only because of the nature of how the commercial has changed, but the use of GPS, things like Waze. The GPS says, go this way, so instead of the community naturally finding many paths to go through it, it drives all the traffic down one road. And it's not the safest road, and it's not the road that the community that has historically said, this is where the traffic should go. And even though we have the cops monitor it, it is a continual problem. So I think when we're looking at the zoning, the role of technology around how we get from here to there has not very well been incorporated.
And on the issue of the uses and the conflict between industry and commercial, one of the things we have attempted to do, because we did spend a lot of time in looking at sort of the uses that were allowed in the commercial districts in the draft, was try to look at the character, in other words, of the use and make it consistent with commercial character, where we'll take another look at that. I don't know, Chad, if you have anything you want to
No, I think that will do it. Sir.
Thank you. Well, of course, we can't control GPS, but
Clarion has also looked at the zones themselves, not just the uses, but the purpose statements of those zones, and we've worked together to refine where certain uses should be allowed in which zones. For example, the proposed CS zone, or commercial service zone, which would replace our current commercial miscellaneous zone, it has been refined to be more obviously service and automobile oriented, whereas the other commercial zones have been refined to be much less so. So we're trying to make sure the right uses go into the right zones themselves.
The question is, should construction be commercial? Is that, when you're talking about commercial and you show these nice, when you talk about commercial and when you show these type of pictures, I didn't see any dump trucks in this, but the area is, that's what it is. I get car carriers that can carry 6 trucks, 6 cars on it, 6 to 7 cars, down my little residential street. It'll drop off 1 car at a construction lot and drive back. And it happens constantly.
Right.
It behaves more like something that's more industrial.
That comes down to a question of scale. So the current regulations we have for those kind of uses, like storage yards and contractor storage, there's a ton of contractor uses in the current zoning ordinance. They relate to the scale of operations on those properties. What I don't know, what we can't tell you here today, is whether these uses you're talking about are actually legal uses or not, and that plays a big role too. So it's, if you give us some information, we can look into that for you. And then, if assuming they are legal, then they have a permitted use that's been determined at some point in the past. But we're trying to make those kind of refinements with those issues in mind.
Thank you. Eugene Grant, Sea Pleasant, Smart City of Excellence. I have a question that I would like to piggyback off of a couple of people raised about grocery stores. In July 1 last year, we lost a major grocery store in our community. And since then, our team has been working to try to bring back a grocery store for our residents. And we've spoken to several investors throughout the United States to consider our community for investing in a grocery store. And as they've done their feasibility studies, they've come back and let us know that we actually have adequate grocery stores. So I got a little confused. We wanted to understand and read their studies. So in one of the studies, we noticed that they cited PG Atlas as a source of their information. PG Atlas indicates that there are about 3 grocery stores currently in existence in our community. We scratched our head and did further research and found out that they identified the Best One convenience store as a grocery store. So when investors are taking into consideration places where they will invest, they see that there is competition there. They're not from this community, so they feel as though, or their interpretation is that we have adequate grocery stores. I need to understand why would PG Atlas indicate that the best one convenience store is a grocery store, and they also identified the CVS as a grocery store. Well, they're not grocery stores, or at least that's not how I would define them. So in the zoning process, how do you adequately address that? And I will remain standing while you answer my question.
You raise a very good question. I do not know the methodology used for PG Atlas in this instance, and we'll take that back to our information management division and see how that was done. I know from talking with my colleagues in that division in the past that layers such as the grocery store layers were produced by hard copy phone books, and when's the last time we really saw any of those? So the layer's probably out of date. We do have a new retail study that was released this year. We have food studies that have looked into this issue. We have different categories that probably haven't been fully reflected. That's a matter of prioritization and funding and updates to PG Atlas, which is constantly updated. I mean, it's a pretty good program, but I don't want to go away from your issue here. I would also caution anybody who's using PG Atlas for those types of utilities not to rely on PG Atlas as your source for identifying competition. So anybody who's doing that hasn't done their footwork and probably should do that. I think that speaks to a major issue. I'm sure you have a follow-up.
No, I was going to say, I hope you advised your potential investors about the errors of PG Atlas.
Well, of course, we advise them of the error. However, we don't get to talk to all investors, right? And so those investors who are looking for opportunities, data drives their decision. And if the data suggests one thing, they're not going to sit there and debate with me or my team or others about that data. They trust the sources, and then they move on to other opportunities. And then communities that look like mine or look like me, we do not get the benefit. Now we will continue, because we are a smart city of excellence, we will continue to advocate and advance the legitimate aspirations of our people as we are elected and appointed to do so. But we are very concerned that in this process, it seems to be, there are deceptive practices that are used, there are rules and regulations that are in place that seem to steer investment away from the community that need them. That is certainly what works against the interests of the people who live there until, I guess, gentrification sets in there. Then the rules will then obviously change for the new residents that come there. Well, as long as I am the mayor, and that I am, I will continue to advance the causes of our people to make certain that we advocate for the best interests of our people. Now, in reference to Mr. Ayu's question earlier about municipalities being a part of the process, I don't think that I was satisfied with the response. Because we do not have a zoning authority, what part of the process will you take under consideration our concerns, our objections to certain types of stores being brought into our communities? It seems as though the way the process is, because the county has the authority to make these decisions, you do not take under consideration the people that live in these municipalities, what their desire is. We don't want any more pawn shops in Sea Pleasant. We don't want any more liquor stores in our community. We don't want any more of these kinds of stores in our community, and our voices should be heard and it should not be ignored. And again, as long as I am the mayor of Sea Pleasant, a smart city of excellence, we will most certainly advocate and advance our cause and make certain that we are heard.
Thank you, Mayor Grant. And I just want to, reassurance isn't the right word, I want to speak a little bit to the process of engagement. So we're year 4.5, Clarion's about in year 4 of this process. We've had more than 330 community meetings all over the county, including outreach to all of our municipalities. And we met, when I first took over project management in September 14, we met with every municipality except Laurel. So these meetings such as this, we are hearing you. We're hearing you loud and clear. We have heard many, many times concerns over the proliferation of certain types of businesses. As Clarion has also made clear, it's extremely challenging to regulate that type of proliferation. It can be done, but it's a policy level decision that the council would have to make. And they're well aware of the issues. We encourage you to let your council members know your concerns if you haven't already, and keep that issue foremost in their burner. But we also have our comment site. We've taken many thousands of comments from these meetings and from that site. Please use that. I believe that you've sent a letter on behalf of the city that we've responded to and tried to incorporate some of the concerns. We're not going to incorporate everything, we'll be honest. Certain decisions are made, everybody's a little bit unhappy in this process. Hopefully that means we're doing a good job. If everybody's a little unhappy and nobody's furious, then we've made some compromises. That's what we're trying to do. And we're listening to everything. We may disagree, but we want to make sure we have a better county that works for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here tonight as a beekeeper, and I want to thank you very, very much for what the gentleman said earlier, that you've heard us loud and clear. So my question now is, where and when do we look for whatever the new draft is going to be to cover us?
Well, the comprehensive review draft is the new draft that's been taken in the past 2 years. You mean the beekeeping issue specifically? Okay. January is our target.
Okay.
I think this young lady, did you have a question?
My name is Kelly Gasner. I manage a commercial property very close to here on Landover Road. I wanted to address some of this kind of shocking social classism that's arising here and express a concern that in the effort to draw new economic development, we're focusing only on high-end economic development and not focusing on the entrepreneurs and small business owners who own the much reviled nail salons and dollar stores and small convenience stores. This is our low-skilled but entrepreneurial community. This is our immigrant community. To hear them denigrated this way is shocking. And I want to make sure that as part of this plan, that community is being taken into account. They're a vital part of this community's economy.
Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes left. I believe we had a hand here. And then we will end on that final question.
Actually, on a couple of things, connecting them together. At the risk of sounding almost like the mayor of Seat Pleasant, who talks about a smart city of excellence, Greenbelt is one of the 3 original towns. And I do want to thank both the Park and Planning Commission, the Director of Planning, Councilmember Todd Turner, who actually, for the request of our mayor, did come out on this question about the NCOZ zone. No problem. But there was a connection that was made, and that's greatly appreciated. And this is one of the questions, and I understand from Councilmember Galaros that this will be something that's going to be addressed later, I guess, by the county council after adoption of this plan. And that is my concern about affordable housing. And Montgomery County, as a lot of folks here know, has the multiple dwelling units. Fairfax County has affordable dwelling units. They're all meant to establish a process where you have development and greater affordable opportunities, and done in such a way so that when you're looking at a development, you aren't saying that's where the folks that really are doing really well and that's where the folks that aren't doing so well live. I mean, it's done with an inclusive goal. Is your understanding that, because it's not part of the plan at this point, in terms of what the process will be in terms of bringing that issue up and when that might be addressed, would it be subsequent to adoption?
Let me take this mic and turn it off since it seems we're losing the quality anyway. Yes, and I don't want to say no, but yes, but. We are currently, the but is we are currently working as a county through the Department of Housing and Community Development on the comprehensive housing strategy. And that's the policy level tool that will provide the guidance that will lead to zoning implementation following the adoption of the zoning code.
Okay, and that probably translates sometime next year.
In terms of the comprehensive housing strategy, I believe so. And then with the zoning rewrite, sometime next year, it'll probably be the year after that the zoning rewrite would go live, and then it would be at that point that we would either have been able to catch up with the comprehensive housing strategy recommendation, should the council wish to do that. Montgomery County did the zoning text amendment the day their code went live, or it could come shortly thereafter. And then just the last question for the evening, we do have to. Okay. All right then, I hope that this was educational. It certainly was for us, and we thank you for all the very good insight that you brought to the table tonight. It's very helpful for us. Thank you.